I'm moving slow, but I am moving. I've got the fabric stretched out here, laid out the way I want it. There's some protrusions that stick out on it. Of course, the carry handle's back in the back, and then I had another handle put on right behind the aft baggage compartment door to use for a grab handle when we're getting on and off the floats. And those all have to be trimmed around with this. And then we have these ears sticking out here. These are ears that stick out. This is for the fairing that goes over between the wing and actually the flap back here. But anyway, the fairing goes over this. And you don't have this on here if you have modified the flaps to come all the way inboard, but I just have standard flaps. So these ears here, the fairing comes down over the top of the wing and goes around these. They stick out, and I had to cut out around those to get those to fit. I put polybrush around these to stiffen the fabric up so they don't fray out too bad. I cut out a piece of fabric and glued on underneath these, so these will glue down to that. Then there'll be a doubler going over the top of that. And then I put some polybrush around those handles where the cutouts go on those, just to make it easier to cut them out so they don't fray. So I've got it laid up on its side now, and I can start working on gluing this down to this cross member here. This is the main spar carry-through member here for the rear spar. There's a piper channel here that goes across to frame this in, and then I put in a plate in there to put nut plates on to screw the headliner to, and then there's the main spar carry-through member that goes through there. So this will be all glued to that. And that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to glue this down first, pull this tight this way, and cut this all out, glue that down to there. And then there's no fabric from there forward. The skylight goes in here, so this fabric will be cut out. I don't know whether I'm going to put fabric on the wing roots or not. I didn't have them on the other airframe. It's really not necessary, but it might stop some of the noise from coming through and maybe some water from coming through or something like that. Rain, moisture that gets in between the wing root and the wing root fairings. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut this fabric out here and glue that in. I got this section here. This is where the rear spar carry through goes, and that's the front of the fabric. I have the skylight the rest of the way. I got this all glued down, and I got it trimmed up. I just heated it up with the iron and then got the excess glue off of it. I still need to get around in the back and with the iron and flatten it out. It's actually pretty good. These two ears that stick out here, I got those cut out and fitted on there. Of course, I had to make a slot because the fabric was out to here, so I had to get a little slot in there to get them to go down, and I put a backer behind them, and I've just got them glued on with some poly brush there. I got the left side of the tail glued on. It's glued on this top rib on this left side on the top, and then on the right side all the way around, and then here on the trailing edge it's glued along this edge here and then wrapped around. Back here on the tail post, I wrapped that around. This structural part here, this strut, whatever this is called here, and leave the bottom of the tail post open. Got this left bottom glued up. It's just glued to this face here. I've still got to trim this off. I just marked where my trim goes and just put some poly tack on that so I can cut it with and not have it fray. We'll get that finished glued on later, but anyway, I got this pretty nice. I got the fabric stretched out pretty good there, pretty tight, so that should tighten up real nice when we get the heat to it. That's all the way up to that float attach fitting there, and that's straight down below that rear spar. So I've got to cut out around that, and I put some poly tack around that, some real thinned poly tack around that, so I can cut that out without it fraying. But I'm going to wait till tomorrow to do that now. Yeah, I've got to figure out how to tighten that up the rest of the way, because that's the end of where the fabric's glued up there on the top. So I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of that. It gets glued in around the rear window, of course, and then around the front window, and I've got to get all that taken care of before I can start pulling that tight, or pulling that down and gluing it down. This right side, I haven't done much with it yet, but I did cut out around this handle. This is such a big handle here, this grab handle, that it really protrudes. And I know in the book and in the video they say to leave the protrusions sticking out, iron everything the first time and then cut them out, but that sticks out a long ways, and I don't think it'd really work on that. It works okay maybe on the wing fixtures and stuff, but not something like this. So anyway, I cut that out so I could get the fabric tight against the fuselage, and I've taken a patch here, and so far I've got it glued in with polybrush on the top. I have to get that glued down somehow on that lower half of that cut. I'm going to wait for that stuff to dry real good, make sure it's got a good bond before I fool with it anymore. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do here on this forward section. You start losing a lot of the fabric on here when you're cutting out for the windows and stuff like that. If you put the fabric on before you put all the fuel lines and everything in, you can get it tight up there on that wing root. But with everything on there already, it's kind of hard to do that. So I pulled that forward past where the carry-through member is, the wing spar carry-through there, and glued it up on that ridge, that rib there, where it forms that wing form on the top. And then to that main structural member there, I glued it to it, and to the vertical structural member there, where the hinge comes out, the wing hinge point. Glued around the window, of course, the D window, and then below this sliding window and this forward window here up to, as far as it goes up to this structure right here. That's as far as the fabric goes. So they cut everything off. That'll make it a little bit easier to handle. But that's all glued up. Now I can pull that tight down below there, fit it around those landing gear fittings and stuff, and get that glued up on that lower longeron there. I've got it glued to the lower longeron, but I don't have the seam glued yet, so I've got it all marked and cut for the 1-inch seam. What I've been working on here the last is getting this tail, the right side of the tail, glued on. I've got the fabric fairly tight on the left side there where it's glued up, and I didn't shrink it, but I marked on it for the 1-inch overlap, and now I've glued the fabric on the right side of the fin. So I'll let that cure, and then come back and I can start gluing it to this lower longeron. I've got the tail, the vertical fin all glued down. I got a little bit of trim work and stuff to do around it there, trimming up some of the joints on the top of the tail post there and on the front of the fin. And I've also got to figure out how to put that fabric in there on that bottom of the tail post in there on that V. I got the fabric trimmed up and all glued on the seam on the left side on the bottom up to the rear float plane attach fitting. And then I've got the right side all glued down. Preliminarily, I still have to finish the seam, the 1-inch section of the seam, or the overlap of the seam there. But I've got it glued to the tube, and I've got it trimmed up for the seam there, for the overlap on the seam. So it's just a matter of gluing that down. I haven't done anything to the forward portion of this right side yet. I'll get this tail done first now. Anyway, I think I'll put this away for the night and come and look at it again tomorrow. So I told a little bit of a fabrication, a little bit of a fib last night. Didn't intend to, but I said I was going to quit here about 1:30 and come back and finish that seam today. Well, it was staring me right in the face as I got everything wrapped up to put away, and I decided to go ahead and finish it, and I went ahead and glued that seam up on that right hand side there, and I got all the seams all finished up on both sides up to the float attach fittings on it. So I've got around the sliding window and the windows cut out on the left side. So that's what I'm going to do here now, is get this right side set up. I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to mark where my door opening is there, and I've got the fabric stretched out there now. I want to try to keep it oriented in a pretty straight line there to keep as much of the wrinkles and stuff like that out of as possible. And once you cut this in, it's easy to get it out of alignment. So anyway, I've got it all stretched out there, clamped up, get the fabric pretty much oriented the way it's supposed to lay. So I'll take a pencil and make a pencil line around the areas that are going to cut out there for the door. Going to be cut out here for the door, and then up to here, and then this is where the piper channel goes. This is where the panel goes, and then the cowling, the boot cowl goes here. So we'll only have fabric up to here, and all of this area will all be cut out. I'll probably go ahead and glue it in on this side up in here like I did the other side, and then so I'll glue this down. I'm going to mark this with the pencil to see where my glue line goes here, and glue this down. That way I can bring my fabric back into the same relative position here and keep it oriented properly after everything is all cut out. And I'll glue this up around the door and get this piece glued in, and then I'll cut out around this window and glue it in, and then I've got to cut out around this baggage cargo door, lower door, and then the upper one in the back. Well, it's starting to look like something now. I measured out and trimmed up around the door and the window and got those glued on, just the face glued on. And then I went cut out of course the back window, the D window, and glued it down. And then I cut out the lower baggage compartment door. And then I come back along, I went ahead and glued those onto the inside, not just on the frame, but I just went ahead and went around that door frame and glued it down over the top and down on the inside. Still have to do the windows, both D windows, the right and the left side. The left side I've got it trimmed up and ready to glue in, and the back edge of it there around the curve, I've got to cut reliefs on it so that it will fit in there around the curve, but that's all done. I still got to do around the landing gear fittings and stuff there. That's next, I guess, since I've got this much of it done. It's amazing how much change there is in that with just a little bit of rags on there. It's starting to look more like an airplane now. Get the fabric tucked in around the windows. All of the fabric is glued down around the lower longeron there, cut out around the fittings and stuff there for the landing gear and stuff on both sides. And then the tail's all glued up, glued down. A couple more little things to do on it, and then I'll start getting the iron out and start going over all the seams and flattening those out and stuff, and getting those down and clean up all the excess polytack. Well, I got all the glued seams ironed down and washed with MEK. I like doing those seams before I shrink the fabric, because once you shrink the fabric, it puts a lot of stress on the seams. All that fabric pulls against it, so I do it before I shrink the fabric, and that way there's less chance of pulling a seam. So the next step on here now is to shrink the fabric and then put the poly brush on it, the coat of polish brush on it, before we start making up the gussets and stuff. This little cover-it iron was given to me by a friend of mine who after he covered his airplane, when he knew I was going to start covering the tail feathers on mine. He gave it to me years ago, and it works fine. Problem is, again, you can see all of the polytack that's burned itself onto the bottom there, and so it gets real sticky and hard to use. But I like using this smaller iron on some of the stuff, like doing the seams, because you're heating up a smaller area at a time. Whereas this iron, you're heating up a bigger area, and it might have a tendency more to slip the seam, where this one will heat up a smaller area, and then by the time you move it over a little bit, the areas over here have already cooled off and the polytack's stuck back down again. Anyway, it's got a rheostat on it, and again, we put some tape on there and calibrated that with a thermometer. This stuff's a pain in the ass to clean off. So anyway, I saw these advertised, and I decided to buy one of these. They said they've got a computer, and they're supposed to be more accurate on the temperatures and stuff like that. And it's got the rheostat up here in the handle, and it had Teflon coating on the bottom, which I'd hoped that stuff wouldn't stick to. Well, the rheostat is not as accurate as what they say. We can use the infrared thermometer on this one, and even using that and the regular thermometer, I could see that this thing is not calibrated exactly perfect. But it does hold its temperature okay, and it is a little bit lighter than this one. This one is twice as heavy as this one. But that's a good thing in the iron, because it holds its temperature more stable on there. This one has got a smaller shoe on it, a thinner shoe, so it'd be more likely to cycle through the temperatures. One of the nice things about it is this stem right here is plastic and it's not heated, and so you can get your hand down here to put pressure on it. Where this one here, this thing gets hotter than hell, and you don't want to be touching that because you burn on that. So you just have to hold a wooden handle. So this Teflon coating on here didn't work as well as I'd hoped. It gets sticky on it too, and problem is, once it gets sticky like this, you can't just wipe it off with some MEK. I soaked this one for 2 days with MEK off and on, and I couldn't get it softened up. The only way to really get it to come off is to take something and scrape it off. Well, of course, you do that, and then the Teflon scrapes off of it. So anyway, this thing's about 80 bucks or something like that, and this one's about 20 bucks. So this one is the better buy as far as I'm concerned. I decided to do one more thing before I shrunk the fabric on this. I papered over those wing roots, I cleaned them up and put the fabric on there. I had to split it around those wires there because I've got wires that run all the way from the instrument panel there back to the ELT, and those are continuous wires. I didn't want to cut those and splice them, so I split around those. Now, the other airframe wasn't covered there, the wing roots weren't covered, and I wasn't going to cover them because you've got, especially on the left side, you got a lot of stuff penetrating that going into the interior wing root cover. We've got the headset jacks, and on this side you've got the ELT annunciator panel as well as the fuel gauges. But I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. I'll have to fit those interior panels up and cut out for the things that penetrate there. I thought maybe having those up there might help reduce some of the cockpit noise, interior noise, and maybe stop some of the water infiltration when we're flying in the rain. Might keep from getting rain water in there that gets in around the wing roots and migrates into the interior of the airplane. So it doesn't hurt nothing to do a little bit to keep the cockpit noise. That stuff doesn't weigh anything. It doesn't add hardly any weight to the airplanes. Anyway, it can't hurt anything. I'm going to go ahead and turn that airplane over on its side here now and start shrinking the fabric. I'm going to do the top first, and then I'll do the sides. 250 to start with. The belly is already shrunk to 250, and we'll turn it up to 350 and do the whole thing.